Okay, welcome to Craft Politics, everyone. Andrew has decided to skip out on this week. We'll have to give him help next week. So, unfortunately for you guys, you are stuck with me. But you should not be too sad. We have an amazing guest today. No ordinary guest. Karen Stintz is a political veteran. She cut her teeth in the trenches of Toronto City Hall, steered one of the most complex public institutions in the country, I would argue, which is the Toronto Transit Commission, through times of intense scrutiny and reform. But what makes her fascinating now is what just happened. I find this fascinating. Maybe Karen still has some PTSD from it. Uh,
That would be fascinating, but let's use interesting. I'll stay with interesting.
but it's that in the 25 federal election here in Canada, she nearly wrestled back the riding of Eglinton Lawrence from the Liberals. It's a riding that has only gone blue once in 2011 when Stephen Harper, my old boss, won it as a majority government. And the 2025 numbers, though, are both promising and discouraging, mostly because we conservatives tend to assume that if we can split the vote on the left, we naturally win. Well, listen to these numbers from this election. The Liberal, Vince Gasparo, got 49.21% of the vote. Karen got 47.77%. And the NDP got a whopping 1.77%. The left was not split, and we lost by the slimmest of margins. And so, obviously, if we cannot win in these conditions, when can we win? What does it take? And that's what we're exploring this week. And so, Karen, first of all, how are
Yes,
you feeling? Have you recovered?
I have. Yes, I've come through the other side, but I will say I thought I didn't expect that outcome. I thought we were gonna, cross the line first, and so it took a bit to recover. But no, I'm coming through it.
I mean, I've only once occasionally dabbled with the concept of ever running for public office, and then quickly dismissed the idea because
You're
I couldn't
wise.
imagine just door knocking for weeks and well, in your case, even longer than that. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, that's tough. Listeners will recall that a couple weeks ago we had Sean Spear from the Hub on the show. Sean and I had a small little riff about, is there room for conservatism in urban cities? What would it take for the movement, for the party even to get more traction in urban settings? And that's why we wanted to have you on the show. So as I talked about when I introduced you, you've served Toronto voters directly. I'm curious how you would describe what urban voters are looking for today, particularly from a conservative candidate.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk to all urban voters. My experience was really in my riding, but it's a diverse riding, and so I think reflective of the city and typically when and also reflective of the country because as you know, the riding did turn blue, it was because there was a conservative majority government, and this riding went conservative. So it has happened. It can happen, and I do think the collapse of the NDP is a new dimension that the conservatives are going to have to wrestle with, and with the liberals as well, to be candid, because the liberals have gone, I think, to the left of where they typically would be, and the urban voter wants a government that's more in the middle. And it's not that they don't want a conservative government, but they want a government that is more moderate. And there was lots of things that dimensions that happened that rewrote the typical campaign playbook in this last election. But I think that there's a couple of things conservatives need to do. And number one is they have to recognize that not everybody is an enemy. The city, like the urban voter, is not an enemy. And so the media is not an enemy. And Bay Street's not an enemy. And so I think there has to be a little bit more outreach. And, I was talking to a colleague, not a colleague, what I hope to be a colleague, Adam Chambers, MP. And I said, if there's a chapter for this, what we're in now, the chapter needs to be called Making Friends and Allies,
Yes.
because the conservatives don't really have friends. And the reality is that in the urban centers, the traditional media still plays a very, very strong role. The Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, CP24, CBC. And while I understand that nationally, those media outlets don't have as much influence, certainly in the GTA and particularly in Toronto, they matter. And I could tell you, when I went knocking on doors, I could tell you exactly who reads the Globe, exactly who reads the Star, exactly who's watching CBC. And when you don't have any allies, and I'm going to say that the mainstream media, they want to tell a story, and they have a narrative that they want to push out, and we saw it in full display. But that being said, if that's the only narrative and it's not countered by anything, then that becomes the only narrative, and that's how the ballot question got decided.
Yeah, I've not, I've I've been gently critical at times about our approach to media and the movement. I've never understood picking fights
Yeah.
with people who hold a pen. I mean, you're always going to have media that hold a particular bias, a different perspective, but you don't need to go out of your way to aggravate them. Particularly, I would suggest when if we do need to make inroads in urban settings. Oh, look who's joined
Oh,
us!
well,
One
I
of the
thought
first.
you can't have the star of the show not on, and I can't leave for Karen just with Joseph because that would just be a disaster. So I've like literally changed everything and rearranged to save this episode. So here I am.
Oh,
Is that
well,
is that
thank you for gracing us.
well?
Lovely to see you.
Your words,
Yeah,
not mine.
Andrew, your feed looks pixelated.
Does
I can't hear you.
well,
You should get better
it's
reception.
well, this is outrageous. But anyway, I wanted to join, so I'm really sorry because I thought after messing. So I apologise. Anyway, I'm here. So
You're here. Well,
am I allowed to
we
stay?
were
That's
just
the
talking
question.
about. We'll allow it for now. Now, whether you're allowed to talk or not is a different issue. But for now, we were just getting into a perspective around Karen's view is the need to make more friends and allies in the next stage of where we're at, and talk about the sheer impact and influence of legacy and traditional media in urban settings.
Yeah.
And I was just reflecting on, I've never understood the need to pick fights with earned media, and it just could be my background. Yeah, I started off politically as a press secretary. Like my job was to build relationships, positive relationships with media, because you never knew when you're going to need it. And it's an interesting take here, and I didn't realize the degree to which legacy media still carried influence in urban settings. So very interesting
Well,
take.
particularly if you look at the voter breakdown, and I haven't looked at the demographics, but anecdotally from when I was knocking on doors, there is no question the younger generation was clearly motivated and inspired by Pierre Poilievre. And as I was, because I listened to him speak and he spoke to me and he was saying things that no one else has the courage to say, and he was standing up for this country, and he identified the issues that were impacting people's daily lives. And that was true 10 months ago, 12 months ago, 14 months ago, and it's true today. So if you take Trump and tariffs off of the table, the issues that we had 14 months ago are still in play now and still impacting people's quality of life in urban settings as well as across the country. But I think where things fell down is particularly in the older generation, and women, they couldn't relate to Pierre in the way that I could because their lens was through the traditional media. And it was made more complicated by the fact that he had these big rallies where all the followers, the devotees came, but there was no environment where he was conversing with people outside of that setting. So he made a strategic choice not to do the circuit. I'm speaking in Toronto. He didn't do the economic club lunches. He didn't do the Canadian club lunches. He didn't do the things that even Stephen Harper realized he had to do if he was going to get friends and allies in the city. Because you only had your glimpses of Pierre were at the rally or through traditional media. And so if those were your only two options and you didn't go to a rally, then the traditional media was telling you what to think about him as a leader. And the other part was that he was the leader. He was the Conservative Party. He was the new Conservative Party. So I would go door to door and I'd hear, Karen, you're great. I'm not sure I'm ready to vote for your party. And so that was also hard to overcome because I didn't bridge that gap between what it meant to be an urban conservative.
Right.
I think
And
that
That makes any sense.
we talked about this before, didn't we? I think that's a really interesting perspective because I was struck by where were the pictures of Pierre with young families? Where were the pictures of him, with a young mum and dad who were struggling with their bills, or a young couple struggling to purchase a home? Because that's what everything had been for the previous 2 years. And then when we got to the election, it was rallies, rallies, rallies. And then, as you say, in the mainstream media or the legacy media, whatever you want to call it, just images of him in rallies. It just seems strange to me that he seemed to have made a really good argument about how people
Yeah.
were falling behind in cities, and then there was just no imagery to kind of support that. And even the literature that went out in a lot of the urban ridings seemed to be about pipelines and about other stuff, and it just seemed to me it was a missed opportunity. So it's interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, and in this riding in particular, it's a big concern about crime.
Yeah, the
And
crime.
the crime that we're experiencing right now is not your typical, I would say, urban threat. It's really, we have an element in this country of organized crime that is playing itself out by car theft, going into the malls, robbing jewelry stores, carjacking. Like it's become it's extreme, and it's
Endemic.
actually now cemented right into this country. And so part of what this riding needed was to hear somebody that wasn't just going to say, like, we're going to use the notwithstanding clause to lock criminals away, but to really demonstrate that they understood why we're having this problem now and what is it that is causing this to happen. And 2 years of continued auto theft that equals $1 billion. All of our insurance claims are going up now, right? And so, but to thread that needle, because, and I'm not going to say that the urban voter, has more knowledge about these things, but in some cases the urban voter needs to have a little bit more of a sophisticated discussion about how am I understanding your issue and how am I going to solve your issue. And I heard a lot about how the sound bites weren't working for people, and that was interesting because it cut two ways. In the traditional media that wasn't that interested in covering Pierre in depth, having a soundbite allowed him to cut through. So everybody knew axe attacks, whether it irritated them or not, knew axe attacks. But when it filtered down beyond that, he didn't have a message for people about how he understood what they were going through in their day-to-day lives. And so once the carbon tax was removed, there was very little there.
Right.
And then it was his personality. And his personality was very compelling for some voters. And then for other voters, it had the flip side. And so I happened to be in the riding where the persona and the personality of the leader wasn't as compelling as it was in different markets.
You talk about crime, which to me seems so instinctive that would be an issue for which, well, one, it's an issue typically conservatives are seen to be competent at and very strong on. So when the times call for it, conservatives are seen as the natural antidote to rising crime. And, I'm in Toronto today. Unfortunately for me, I had to leave Vancouver, and I'm walking around our office. Karen is around Old City Hall. It's got some rough patches about it. And when I used to live in Toronto, I don't remember it being this rough. But like crime is something that every single one of our friends here, my colleagues, every single night when they go home, they're confronting a version of it or they're being exposed to it visually. And it just seems to me the crime as an issue is one that we should, there's a natural way for us to make some in-grounds with urban voters on. But then I'm like, okay, is that enough? Maybe it's not. And then you look at the traditional issues that maybe it's a cliche, associate with sort of urban issues. And to me, they come off often as the types of issues that conservatives, we've been kind of scared to dabble into because we assume we have no credibility on them, right? It's like public transit, affordable housing, bike lanes. Apparently we hate bike lanes.
Right.
I used to be a
Right.
biker. I love bike lanes when I lived
I love bike lanes. I use one today.
Public
but
parks,
is it
libraries,
just
swimming pools, right? Municipal facilities, yeah? The things that are just seen as unsexy for conservatives.
Yeah. But do you think, Karen, is there something about the issue sets that are traditionally seen as urban, and maybe I'm really old in my archetype of thinking about these issues, that there's just a credibility gap, and if so, how do we overcome it?
So I would say, to drill down and to say, like, on the crime issue and what we're seeing in the streets with the drugs and the homelessness and the suffering, I think that conservatives lost a moment where they could be seen as compassionate conservatives, because I think most people would agree that there is no dignity in sleeping in the street. I think most people would agree that you shouldn't have open drug use in front of daycares and schools. And so when Pierre Poilievre said, okay, that's wacko, quite frankly, it is wacko. Like what was happening in Vancouver and parts of the downtown east side is completely wacko. But with that, okay, pay attention to what I'm going to say now. We lost that moment to say compassionate conservatism means that we want people to live in dignity, and there is no dignity in sleeping in a park. Now, that no one hears that. No one hears that. They're like, no, 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 we have to be empathetic. And all the advocates say, no, 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 we need to protect their right to use drug use in front of parks and schools and daycares. No, 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 we need to protect the rights of those who have to sleep on the street because they have nowhere else to sleep. And there was a moment where the conservatives, which I believe very strongly, which is why I ran for the party, is that we don't give permission for people to lose their dignity and allow them to be vulnerable and exposed. And yet, no one's talking about that. The conservatives could have talked about that, but I think they missed that opportunity.
Yeah, and it's a space that is just so owned by the left, isn't it? So, you know, if you
Absolutely.
and actually, I kind of thought that he was heading in that direction with the whole, you know, we'll put people into beds, rehab, not safe supply and all that stuff. But it's just, I think it's an area of conservatives. Is it maybe a fear that going near that either turns off some of your own supporters, or is it that we'll just end up in a dogfight around an issue that is just too difficult for us, you know, the whole drug scene? Because then you get into the whole legalization of drugs, and you're into this whole area which everybody who commentates on that, you know, well, not everybody, but the majority of people seem to have a particular perspective which is anti-conservative. So you know, maybe it was that, but
Well, I think there's an authenticity piece as well. Like,
yeah, the
who's giving the
authenticity,
message?
yeah.
I think that Pierre had developed a persona which was very much like cutting to the heart of the issue. So for him to turn around and talk about compassionate conservatism may have been one step too far too soon without taking those middle steps or having people around him to talk about it. And so I think that, like, Pierre is an authentic person. He speaks with authenticity. He believes very strongly in this country. He believes and he has a plan and he knows what his plan is. But sometimes communicating that out to those that aren't the believers is where that opportunity is for him. And I think that, back to legacy media and back to other spokespeople, like, I think that he can benefit from having more people, more advocates, more allies helping to tell that story and being authentic and telling that story, because there's a lot of conservatives in the Toronto who felt that they weren't being asked what their opinion was. And so unfortunately, when Doug Ford et al. And company, you know, came out with their campaign against the conservatives federally, some people they bought into that because they're like, yeah, Pierre didn't call me either, and I haven't heard from the party, and they didn't ask me what I think. And these are long-time established conservatives with networks that extend across the city that felt like they weren't being asked what they thought. And so when Doug Ford and Corey did their gong show, unfortunately, it resonated with some conservatives in the city.
Right. But you did have success in the sense of the vote share that you captured. I think there's got to be some lessons in there for the party or for the movement. You know, you knocked on so many doors, you spoke to so many voters. I mean, at this point, you've got a very good sense of what worked and what didn't work. I'm curious, what if you have a view on, like, the topics, the frames, or even the messaging that sort of served as a connective tissue that, like, you saw was a bit of a gateway to getting urban or urban adjacent voters to consider voting blue?
Again, I think it really is that that the conservatives need a way to demonstrate what they stand for. And they're either going to have to re-engage with legacy media, or they're going to have to do something else more creative. And because today, you know, even today, and up until, you know, I heard crazy things like, oh, Pierre is like Donald Trump. Okay, Pierre is absolutely nothing like Donald Trump. Okay, so let's just be clear that is not grounded in any kind of reality. But me telling that to somebody did not change their hearts and minds. I heard Pierre is going to sell out this country, which again is lunacy. And another issue that I don't understand how we lost control of is the whole patriotism idea.
Right.
Because, like, it was Pierre who was defending our flag. Pierre was defending our legacy and our history and our heroes. And, like, he was the one talking about the history of Canada and why it's an incredible experiment. And yet I'm knocking on doors with these giant Canadian flags, and they're all voting Liberal because they somehow think that voting against Donald Trump is this great act of patriotism, and that the only way they save our country is by voting Liberal. And I was like, I have nothing here. Like, this is the most crazy thing I've ever experienced in my life, because how that slipped away from the conservatives is something I do not understand.
It
Yeah,
is funny, Andrew. I'm sure you got your own version of this story, but sometimes you just knock on a door and you get feedback from a voter, and you just can't. There's no
yeah.
response. You're like,
I'm like, got nothing.
I had that from, I did say I got into a bit of an argument with one person ago. I said, but these are the guys who have been telling you to be ashamed of the flag and ashamed of the country and its history. And they're like, oh no. And all they, and all you'd end up with is just the kind of, no, the Conservatives are just Donald Trump's allies. And it's like, really? It's like, I found it incredible how that just flipped. And I think I still don't have an answer. And I've not really heard a really compelling answer for how and why it did in such a way. It was just incredible. But I mean, I suppose part of it is that maybe the problem that the conservative movement has generally, this is all around the world, is that quite a lot of the public do just think that we are more aligned with kind of American Republican ideas, or like that because because we've defended capitalism over so many years, that means we're kind of crony capitalists, or maybe it's just that we all have that slightly nasty streak that we're just out there to. It's I think I can't remember if I said this on the previous podcast, but somebody once said to me in the UK context that the UK Conservative Party's problem is that too many of the public think it's nasty. It's the thing that hangs around its neck.
Mm-hmm.
For the Labour movement, for the Labour Party, it's that people think they're profligate with money, and for Liberals, it's that people just think they're too much of a do-gooder, and they'll end up, trashing everything and costing them lots of money. And it's just we start from that point of it's just easy to believe, and I don't really know how we get away from that other than just working incredibly hard, right, to prove to people, particularly in urban areas, that we have their back. And that's hard because you have to start that from the grassroots up. And I wonder if there's a question is, are enough Conservatives putting themselves forward for municipal politics? Because you see Conservative cities here that are just dominated by left-wing municipal councillors. And maybe that's where we have to start.
Yeah, well, and I think you're right, because again, we don't have the whole idea of conservatism in the city is not well regarded. And even people on my campaign, like, I don't tell people I'm voting conservative. I'm like, well, why not? Tell people you're voting conservative, for heaven's sakes. Like, the Liberals objectively have not done a good job over the last 10 years, so it's totally fine to say. And the other part is the Liberal Party has gone to the left. It has absolutely gone to the left. Now, Mark Carney is going to pretend that he can bring it to the middle, and everybody who voted for him is going to pretend that that's going to happen. We'll see. I don't know. And maybe it's going to happen. I have no idea. But the whole brand of conservatism, I think, has been tarnished, and we need to collectively rebuild that brand. And I think that it could start at the municipal level, but we'd have to get organized in a way that we're not. And the left, God love them, are exceptionally, exceptionally organized. They are very well organized.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a lot, and we're probably not going to get there this time around. It's probably going to take one more election cycle with mayor, because we're going to have to confront the reality that we're broke. The city's broke, and it doesn't have any leadership, and there's no vision. And you can't keep giving money away. The problem with socialism, right, is eventually you run out of other people's money. And we are there, and we're almost there in the country.
But I think we have to find what is the Conservative offer, like for urban areas, or for and start at that municipal level. And it is, what is the Conservative offer, and it has to start with sound money, but it has to start with your property taxes. In the UK context, your council tax will be protected. But similarly, so will I do think, like, people living in cities have a basic expectation of what they want there, right? Which is they want nice parks, they want good public transit, as we discussed earlier, and they do expect the government to provide for them good public services like sports facilities and swimming pools. And actually, in the UK, municipal government is run by the main political parties. And I think I can point to good examples where we've managed to do that, including my own area, where we took control of the council and we said, right, we're just going to be the good guardians of public money and deliver good public services that the public want. That's not an unconservative thing. That's a super conservative thing. It was conservative leadership that built up a lot of the cities in the Victorian and early 20th century, 20th century. We just have to get back to that offer of doing that, but within an envelope of, we cut out all of that other crap that the left piles onto to local government and to municipalities. Yeah. But how you sell that, I think is it more difficult to sell in the Canadian context because there aren't political parties at a municipal level. So I don't know how you brand that.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult right now, and again, because it's there is no municipal conservative brand. But if you ask people, are you happy with the way the city's run? I'm going to say the majority of people will say no. Traffic is terrible. It's unaffordable. Can't get jobs. On and on and on. The parks are filthy. We spend a lot of money adding very little value. But how you cut through that is something
Yes.
I don't actually.
Yeah, and because what you'll also
Yeah,
have as well. But if you're a conservative, they'll think, oh, well, yes, so the parks are rubbish, so the conservatives will want to sell it off to their rich real estate developer friends.
Right.
And of course, they'll want to close down those expensive to run. This is the challenge we're fighting. I mean, all of those things are lies, right? And, they're not true. But that's the legacy, that's kind of what we have around our neck as a starting point. So we're kind of starting 100 yards back from everybody else in the race because of those things that we've allowed. And I think sometimes it's because we haven't fought back loudly enough and passionately enough.
Yes.
Potentially even but I don't think we potentially fought back in our own movement as well.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm a radically make the federal government as small as is humanly possible.
Absolutely.
Conservative.
Yeah.
And I am also on the flip side to say I think politics should be extremely localized. And I'm okay. In fact, I want to live in a city that's got exceptionally good, strong local services available to me. So I think it's possible to be a federal conservative while holding a view that there is a potential role for good public services in the context of the city. But I don't know that we as a conservative movement have ever have confidence enough to actually have these discussions and recognize that we have people within our own coalition that have a much different view of what government looks like at a local level than federal level. And we just treat it all the same. And I think voters mirror that back to us. They say, if you're conservative federally, you must just want to slash and burn everything at the local level.
Right.
And I think that could be the gap that we have to bridge somehow.
Well, and it's in part because right now we don't have a big urban voice being represented in the Conservative caucus federally.
Right.
And, rightly, I don't believe, quite honestly, I don't believe that the Doug Ford Progressive Conservative Party is a conservative party at all. And so it's still very difficult to talk about what is that? What does it mean, to your point, Andrew? Like what does it, when you think about what does it mean to be conservative? What does that mean? And we've got a gap at the municipal level, at the provincial level, and at the federal level.
Yeah, and I think it's proving that we can run cities well and address the problems, the unique problems that urban centres have. And in many ways, I think we've got the better, well, of course, I think we've got the better answers to that, but I think we're better served to do that because our core values are in the right place on that. Whereas a lot of the activists who actually end up running local government in big cities, their values are in the wrong places, and they end up. I wish, people complain about conservatives don't run a lot of municipal governments, but yet you look at the cities, and are they better now than they were 10 years ago? Are they better now than they were 20 or 30 years ago? No, they're not. Who's been running them for the last 20 or 30 years? Whose ideology? Who's used taxpayers' money to fund every particular little pet issue that they've had? It's that lot, and our cities are worse as a result. They're worse in the UK. They're worse in Canada. They're crime driven. They're dirtier. The services are less good. But I just find, I think a lot of conservatives don't really have the passion for local government or for municipal issues. I came through local government. That's where I came from, and that's what maybe that's what we've got to do. Maybe all three of us need to run for municipal government. How's that?
No. I've been there. I've done that.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, yeah, I meant you and I have. I was really meaning, Joseph, it's time for you to step up.
Okay.
Yeah,
nominated. All in favor.
I once joked that I thought I would either win very strongly or I would lose badly on a one issue policy if I were to run for mayor of the city of Toronto. And that is, I was going to run and promise to make the entire city raccoon free. And that meant
to go through what?
Make the entire city raccoon free.
Raccoon free, yes.
Half the city was going to say I was the worst human being on earth for wanting to cull it of its raccoon population. And then it'd be like the other half that would secretly vote for me.
That's right.
Even if I was going to turn into a pariah. But I don't know. That may be a one and done type approach to winning municipal office.
It was a joke amongst my friends that I won my first council election largely on the basis of a commitment to personally deal with dog poop. Oh. So I ran the famous dog dirt election of 2000 in Hull. But
I can totally see that, because when I was a councillor, honestly, the worst issues were parking, street parking, and dog parks, off-leash off-leash dog parks and anything to do with dogs. I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
Oh, or maybe that's the maybe there's a lesson or a cue there for us for how we
Yes.
make some inroads into
It's vermin
urban
and dog
centers. Well,
poop.
Karen, this is a lovely conversation. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
joining us.
I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm really
Thank you for
sorry
thinking of me.
I was late, but I don't know whether I mentioned, but I was also with the King earlier, so that just did I mention that, Joseph? No, I forgot to mention it, didn't I, when I joined? So yeah, with that whole being with the King thing. So just anyway,
Very good.
can I suggest another policy that will definitely get people elected? I'm standing here in Ottawa, and somebody who promises to open war on mosquitoes will get my vote, because I have been eaten alive, including while standing here doing this, which has been well worth it. But yeah, it's vile. I need to get on a plane out of here. I'm just getting eaten alive.
Oh dear,
Anyway.
thank you for your sacrifice.
Yeah.
Well, this is my service to the people never ends. But no, that was great. Thanks very much for that. And apologies for being a bit late.
Not at all. Thank you.
Well, that was nice of you to actually join us. Honestly, I thought I was going to have to do an issue scan by myself.
Look, I even put a tie on for it and everything. So I'm just sorry that I jumped in and it's probably a bit wobbly.
Wait, were you there? Did you have a rendezvous with the King today?
Well, well, I like to think, there's no evidence of this, but I like to think he personally asked me to be there in attendance. But obviously, it's King's speech. He turns up. And as I put on my LinkedIn post, I was sitting there thinking, I might be the only person in this room who's attended a UK King's speech by him, a Canadian King's speech by him, and also the King's coronation. And then I thought, oh no, he was also at all three of those things. So my narcissism as a former politician kind of kept me in check. I was like, oh, and the Queen was also there, all those. Anyway, it was quite nice. But it was just really interesting to be there and see it all. So it was good.
And do you think it has any impact on the U.S. U.S. relationship, the way we stick handle Trump?
I put a thing on LinkedIn on this. People should read it because obviously it was really well thought through. But my quick perspective was, look, people can say the King's archaic and the monarchy's archaic, but it was a demonstration of how there are two British North Americas. Two things came out of British North America. One with a Republican model to the south, which is very different, and this one, the constitutional monarchy, which took a very different route to America. So it's a really obvious physical demonstration that that Canada is not the 51st state. It is anything but. So I thought that was useful. So anyway, let's do a quick issue scan because I think my phone might die if we're not careful.
Well, that's issue number one, was just the King Charles III's visit to Canada, opens Parliament this week. So it's massive headlines, getting a huge amount of coverage in the US as well. So very interesting. The other bit of news coming out of Canada, of course, late last week, but it's still getting a lot of talk this week, is Prime Minister Carney's single mandate letter. So context for our listeners, prime ministers, or last couple of prime ministers, have sort of developed this tradition of writing mandate letters, specific mandate letters to each of their new ministers. And in the past, they were kept private. It was, so here are your marching orders, now that you're the minister of this ministry. Prime Minister Trudeau made them public, and so they turned into a bit of a comms exercise. And Mark Carney has come in, and rather than have 25, 28, whatever different sort of mandate letters, he's just got one for everyone in their 7 priorities. Things like redefining economic and security relationships, building one Canadian economy, bringing down costs, housing affordability, sovereignty, immigration, and building a cleaner, more affordable Canada. I actually quite like this as a message, which is like, guys, get in line, particularly because he had a rough couple days after he appointed his cabinet with a bunch of ministers going completely off script and rogue. So I think this was a bringing everyone into line. So thought was interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too. And I actually just kind of agree with it, really. It's like, you're all part of the same government, so just do the right thing and get on with it. So what your job is to do, which is to align across government. And anyway, so I thought it was interesting too. But UK, shall I do quick?
And then we lost Andrew because his phone died. I'm telling you guys, it is not easy working with him. Okay, I'm going to close out our issue scan. 1 second. The piece that we were going to end the issues scan on in the UK is Nigel Farage declaring that Reform is now the party of the workers. It's a move that seems to be signaling an attempt, and you would have heard this when we had Ben Houchin on our show a couple weeks ago. The fact that the Reform Party seems to be out-laboring labor, and the divide seems to be around working class votes. And so an interesting positioning. The specific thing that Andrew was just about to get into is that the Reform is setting out to replace Labour as a party of working people, with Farage announcing he would restore winter fuel payments to all pensioners, but more importantly, scrap the 2-child benefit cap. Pretty much saying, if you want to have more kids, go for it. The government will provide the appropriate subsidies. It does seem like Reform has, or my perspective on this, I don't know if this was what Andrew was going to share, but it does seem like the Reform has Labour on the ropes. Labour seems to be in constant reaction mode to what Reform is presenting. And what I find interesting about this story is that some of us, myself, I'll say myself really, just assume that Reform was a threat to the Tories, not necessarily as much to Labour. And it's looking like they're just a threat to everyone. They're just really coming out the middle, and they're scooping from the left, scooping from the right. So very interesting developments coming out of the UK. And then the last thing I was going to raise in our issue scan is in the United States, there's some reporting around CEO succession crisis looming. Companies are facing a growing succession crisis. Apparently, it's fueled by high executive turnover, poor succession planning, weakened middle management layer, job hopping tendencies from younger professionals. And to put a number around it, in early 2025, CEO changes in the S&P 500 firms were on track to hit a record high turnover rate of 14.8%, compared to 11.3% in 2001. That might not seem that large, but it's significant. And the reason why I raise this, why I found this interesting in the political context, is that I've long viewed CEOs as political leaders. And that's just because of the expectations, the demands that voters often apply or hold large corporations accountable for. And to me, when you've got some succession challenges like you have this now, in one way, you actually have a little bit of a political vacuum. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the next generation of CEOs look like, and how well equipped are they for the current political climate that we're in, or more interestingly, for the outlook that comes hereafter. So there we are. That's the issue scan. Thanks for putting up with us as we had Andrew hopping in and out of this week's show, but it's not easy putting on this show with a character like him. So I appreciate you guys all putting up with him. Okay, guys, we'll talk next week.